I've asked, using the names you gave me, Ishik said. Nobody has seen him. Now, perhaps I could find you a fish that could locate him.
Welcome to The Storming Journey, a sacred text reading of The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This podcast may contain spoilers for the Stormlight Archive through Wind and Truth.
Hello and welcome to The Storming Journey. Today we are covering the first interludes from the Way of Kings. I'm Adam and I am the Ardent for today.
I'm Elle. I'm today's Worldsinger.
And I'm Liz. I'll be your Veristitalian.
So I am not much of a traveler. I am much more of a homebody. I like exploring in other kinds of ways. And when I was trying to think through the ways that I like exploring besides rabbit holes of research, which I do on a regular basis, it's kind of hard to have a specific story for that. I think the way that I was thinking about exploring was in terms of my interest in linguistics. I am not so much a person who likes to learn lots of different languages. I mean, I would like to know the languages, but I'm not a person who picks up languages easily. And I'm also not a person who maintains the knowledge of those languages easily. I studied Finnish in college, and now I'm struggling to remember it for some other projects I'm working on. But the reason I study linguistics is partially because of a book by Bill Bryson called The Mother Tongue. Do not read it. It's inaccurate. I will link in the show notes to my debunking of his entire first chapter. I was going to get to the whole book and then I started grad school. So don't read it. But what it did inspire me to do is think about the ways that we talk and the reasons that we talk and the patterns that we have in our speech. So the thing that I kind of landed on in linguistics was specifically corpus linguistics, which is the study of a large amount of text and looking for patterns in that text. And it is a little bit of an exploratory process of saying, what kind of things do we talk about in a specific corpus? So you can have a corpus that's just contemporary American English, for example. And so it's American English used in lots of different contexts during a very small subset of time, contemporary time. Or you could have a historical corpus that covers way more time. Or there's basically any data could be a corpus. It's usually text, but theoretically it could be speech. Anyways, whole other degree. And with linguistics, I really like understanding why people think the way they think and why they do things. And looking for patterns is something that is just really fascinating to me with linguistics. And so that's my experience with exploration is I like exploring the way people think through the way they speak, often in ways that they don't realize that they are doing it.
That's an excellent transition into our Storm's Eye view, where we get to see all sorts of corners of Roshar where people are doing things in different ways for reasons we don't know. So, here's my Storm's Eye view of these interludes. In the Pure Lake, Ishik avoids speaking of his god aloud while hunting for magical fish. Some interesting foreigners have hired him to look for a man named Hoyd, but Ishik hasn't seen him. In Yakaved, Shallan's brother Non-Balat soothes his worry about the danger she is in by pulling the legs off of crabs. And in rural Bavland, Szeth endures the humiliations of his new master, Took, who likes to tell stories of Szeth's strangeness in exchange for free drinks. As they walk or stumble to their rented rooms, they are attacked by bandits who soon find Szeth's Oathstone.
Dun dun dun.
Was gonna do that.
Most of the Szeth chapters should end with that.
Right. Today's theme to look at the interludes is exploration. And I chose this theme because I find the interludes in Way of Kings and in all of the Stormlight archive to be really these fun vacations in some way. Maybe not all fun, but they're ways that Brandon explains it as being ways to look at, the bigger part of Roshar to build the larger story, the larger narrative, the larger world he wants to get across here because he wants to give the reader that big picture of everything that's happening. And I wanted us to think about them as moments of exploration for the world, but also moments of exploration in the text. And I wanted to start off first by thinking about the interludes through a literary way, so the Artifabrian journal way of like, why are the interludes here? What are they doing to both of you as readers, and what are they doing to the book as a whole?
I think it's really interesting that in some ways we're in a renaissance of rediscovering short form, right? I'm thinking of especially streaming media, TV shows. We have so many now where there's like an offshoot show that's like little shorts, right? Like 10 minutes long that allow us to explore the stories of side characters and other parts of the world that we can't get to when we are trying to cram all of the plot possible into our 6 episodes that Netflix will fund, right? So, we're living in a time where we have some room to do the kind of exploration that Brandon is doing in these chapters. I really love the structure of the interludes as well. Like, it is a breath of fresh air. Sometimes it's annoying if the part leaves you with a lot of cliffhangers and then you're like, I don't want to know about what this person over here making shoes is doing. I want to find out what's going to happen to Shallan. But for the most part, I've really enjoyed them. It's nice to take a break, especially in the middle of the epic form, right? The epic fantasy form is really long. These books are so long that you can never teach them in a class because you would take the entire semester, right, to read one book, and you can never get through all 5 that we have so far. But
it's a prerequisite.
Yeah, I know. Prereq, you have to have read all the Stormlight and then come into this class. I've thought about it. Have I drawn up a syllabus for how to teach epic fantasy? Yes, I have.
I will say my science fiction class that I took at Harvard did have us read Dune in one weekend on top of all the other books we were reading. So it can be required. You just assume the students will do it, and then they don't, and that's okay.
It's fine. Yes. But it's nice to have that break, and it almost reminds me of returning to the form of the epic, like epic poetry, or specifically I'm thinking of Ovid. If you've read Ovid, it reads like a series of interludes with no main plot, right? It's just like, let's tell this story, and then let's tell this story. If you read the Metamorphoses, there's just story after story. And the interludes get you that kind of feeling of like, let's just talk about interesting story after story. And you're here for the voice and the world building more than the continuing plot or the characters.
Kind of reminds me of like fan fiction, complimentary, like complimentary, not derogatory. In that it feels like this is a opportunity for Sanderson to like write fan fiction for his own world. Like, I don't know if you can say that because he's the author, but like he talked about how when writing The Wheel of Time, like when finishing the series, he was like, Robert Jordan had so many side characters that just kept coming up. And like, I understand why he did that, but it made the book so long. And so he was like, so the interludes are my way of like containing myself, of saying, I can do this, but I'm going to limit it to these little tiny windows we see into the world. And one of the things I really like about fan fiction personally is I like the way that it lets the community explore more of the world with the author to some extent. and being able to engage with it in a way that makes the experience of reading participatory rather than passive. And I like that Sanderson does these interludes because then it provides additional world building for fanfic writers or for people who are exploring the world in different ways, or, you know, Cosmere RPG, it gives you extra dimensions of like what there is to look for. So yeah, that's something I was thinking about when you were talking about how he's doing this. It feels like a little bit of fan fiction is a little break of, I need to take a break from the epic. So I'm going to write myself a little fun thing about a guy who has fish and likes fish, kind of thing. And like they have meaning, they have importance. Like obviously there's some narrative stuff going on here, but like also it feels like a break. It feels like a nice fresh air. When I was thinking of exploration, the thing that I was kind of doing as I was reading through this theme was I was thinking about the different ways exploration shows up in these chapters. And specifically, like I felt like each one of them, exploration was for a different purpose. So like for Ishik, exploration was like a form of work and it's with a specific purpose-driven intention. For non-Balat, exploration is an expression of bravery and possibly a form of self-soothing, like when he is like exploring what it is like to pull the legs off a gremlin, like that is like a form of self-soothing for him. And then for Zeth, it's not actually really for Zeth here. For his new master Took, exploration is like a point of social status. Like he is using it as a way to like boost his appeal or interest to other people in the area. And so it's just interesting to think about the different ways that exploration shows up in these interludes. So I really like the idea of this theme, having to choose a theme that covers three totally different situations, and yet there is a way that you can see exploration in all three of these.
I think the really interesting part about the interludes is I'm trying to remember if we ever come back to Ishik really, or if we ever come back to threads, right? We come back to the people. I was going to be doing the search real quick on Coppermind, but we come back to the threads of the narratives within the interludes. We never really come back to Non-Balat's character viewpoint. And it's just a moment to explore that. And I think that's what makes it that has that exploration, is because it's so new, it's so different. We've spent 12 chapters now with Shallan and Kaladin, and we all love Shallan and Kaladin here, but I think sometimes their characters can be a little grating in some way, right? Shallan's character can be a little young and naive, right? Kaladin's character can be a little sad boy mopey. And if it was just a book of Kaladin being sad boy mopey for like 1,000 pages, I don't think anyone would pick it up.
Rhythm of War.
Okay, that's fair. But that's not, the entire book is not Kaladin sad boy mopey every single page. And that's what I'm trying to point out here, is that the interludes themselves are in somewhat what I would consider like a vacation from the main storyline. They're a moment to take away, right? So we can go back into that storyline a little bit refreshed. We just got from the moment, the chapter before the interludes, Kaladin almost killed himself, right? And to then hop to the interlude, we're in like the Pure Lake, and it's wonderful. It's great. There's just calm worlds, right? There's some new gods here. Let's just hang out. And then, Hoyd gets mentioned casually, and everyone's ears perk up. But like it's a vacation from that very intense story. It's a moment away. And it reminds us of what that exploration, what the vacations are usually for, right? It's to get away so we can go back in, which is what we get for the next after the interviews, right? And so that's how I'm thinking about them a lot, is a moment to explore, but also a moment to vacate ourselves from the story and take a moment to say, okay, we just had this really emotional moment where Yasna and Shallan had like a really intense moment. Kaladin had a super duper intense moment. We need a break.
Ishik is only in that one interlude. Any other information we have gotten about Ishik has come from Word of Brandon. So
I'm just dying to get more information about the Pure Lake. Like, how does this thing work? That it drains during the high storms? What is going to know? Where are the fish going?
They're going to space with the dolphins.
They form symbiotic bonds with Spren. The investiture does not come from honor, but may come from cultivation. The magical nature of these fish is similar to that of AVR. And I'm going to leave that there.
That makes sense.
Because there is more information on that.
Cool.
I haven't read the newest book yet, so you can't tell me anything.
I think you should, so that we can do a bonus episode.
I am in 2 grad programs. I have a lot going on.
Okay, fine. You can read it over Christmas.
I'm waiting until Thanksgiving at least. I need something for my vacation.
Yeah, Thanksgiving. And then we'll record a bonus episode.
Maybe.
So one thing I wanted to also touch on, and thank you all for bringing in like that really big reading of exploration in each of the interludes. Because my kind of guidance here for the episode is more thinking of the higher Artifabrian level of the interludes. And I wanted us to think for a moment, what do we think about the interludes in a spiritual or sacred way? I think another way to ask this is like, how do we view, like, if my thesis here of they're a vacation around Roshar, they are a time for exploration, they are a time for getting away from the really spiritually intense moments of Kaladin and Shallan going through life, or of Adel and Dalinar and Kaladin, or of, they're these moments that allow us to get away. What do we think about that getting away in a spiritual or in a sacred sense? How can we kind of relate that to a broader type of perhaps the World Hopper connection here, or something that like connects beyond outside of the books in relation to them as a literary technique?
I think of 2 things. I think of in Mormon culture, especially right now, there is a large push for people to attend the temple. And the temple is a place of worship for LDS members who live by certain standards. And it is a pretty individual experience. It's not, while you do things as a community for some of it, it feels very individual. It's not like a group worship experience in the same way. It's much more of an individual worship experience. But part of that, and part of like the encouragement to attend the temple, is as a way of getting away from the world. It is a way to step outside of the busyness of the day. And like temples are often designed so that they're soundproof. Like it is legendary, apparently, that like the Manhattan Temple, you can't hear the sounds of New York outside. I have not been able to verify this, but like apparently that's theoretically what's going on there. And I'm thinking about this, but I'm thinking about it in context of a sermon that I heard when I was attending a Presbyterian church, when I was working as their organist. And it was talking about the Bible story of the Mount of Transfiguration. And the pastor was talking about how Peter wanted to stay on the mountain. Peter wanted to build a temple on the mountain where Christ was and like had been transfigured, and wanted to stay there in this moment of holiness. And the pastor was like, but we have to come down from the mountain. Like Christ says, no, don't build this temple because you have to come down from the mountain. And I remember thinking about that in the context of temples, of like, we're encouraged to go to the temple, but we can't live there. We can't stay there, and we can't stay on vacation. We can't stay in these interludes. We have to come down having like been refreshed, or having learned, or having done whatever we have done on the mountain, on our vacation, on our inner interludes. because we can't stay there. We have to go back to our life.
For me, exploration spiritually is an interesting theme. I think we can take spirituality very seriously a lot of the time, especially in our own tradition, but I think it's generally considered a more serious topic. And it can be nice to just do something different than what you usually do, to try something that maybe you have holy envy from a different tradition, to try flipping your usual practice on its head and doing something different. I tend to switch things up a lot with my scripture reading. I don't follow the usual, the typical Mormon pattern of reading through one book a year, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Book of Mormon. I like to try different things just because I find new things when I explore a different way of looking at them. When I try reading older things, or I read a book from another tradition and compare it with ours, or I read some scholarship and then go back to the text. But just like finding other resources and bringing them back makes the regular practices refreshed. So I think that is important to include some element of exploration in our spiritual practice so things don't get stale.
I think that's one of the things that the Interludes are doing, right? Is it's such a big, epic story where if you didn't have these Interludes, you'd immediately hop to the next chapters, right? The Great Hunt, this big idea. You wouldn't have that moment of either like palate cleansing or that moment of like refreshing exploration. Right. I think it's time then to move on to our sacred reading method, which is going to involve us really thinking through the text, which is why I wanted us to focus the theme more on that broad, higher view of the Interludes, because here in the sacred reading, we're going to dive into 3 different passages and really think of them. And for our sacred reading, we're introducing a new method for here, for our podcast at least. It's not a new method in the study of religious texts, but it's called sacred imagination or imaginative prayer or imaginative contemplation. And it's from St. Ignatius of Loyola, who lived back in the end of the 15th, beginning of the 16th century. And he was the founder of the Jesuits, or the Society of Jesus, which was a order in the Catholic Church that's lasted since, the early 16th century. And he created this way of approaching a text, or specifically approaching the Bible, where you're not given a lot of details when it comes to the Bible. The Bible is not a very descriptive book in many ways. And so he wanted to invite people to, while they were reading, expand beyond the text and imagine what would it look like? What would it sound like? What would you see? So, for example, the story that Elle brought in about the Mount of Transfiguration, we're not given those tactile, sense-motivated descriptions of what that mountain looks like. So in a sacred imagination or an imaginative prayer or imaginative contemplation, you would imagine, what does the mountain look like? What does the mountain sound like? What does the mountain feel like? What is it like to be transfigured? And that would help you connect more to the text. So here I wanted to pull three different descriptions from each of the Interludes and have us imaginatively contemplate what else we can see when I read the different passages. So I'm going to ask Liz and Elle to, if they want to close their eyes, they can close their eyes here. But I'm going to ask them to, after I've read the passage, to think, to kind of provide for us what else they're seeing in their mind's eye, what else they're imagining. Usually, another way to do this would be to go through each of the senses, but I just kind of want to pull your first sense of what else do you see here? What else can you describe that Brandon hasn't described in the text itself, or that the Way of Kings doesn't describe in the text? Does that sound good?
You're ready for it.
All right, so the first is from the first interlude, and it's in the Pure Light. So it says, quote, "The Pure Lake extended in all directions, hundreds of miles wide, its glassy surface perfectly transparent. At its deepest, it was never more than 6 feet from shimmering surface to the bottom. And in most places, the warm, slow-moving water came up only to about mid-cap. It was filled with tiny fish, colorful cremlings, and eel-like river spread. End quote. Whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes and let us know what were you sensing in that description?
So I have some form of aphantasia. I can't imagine things very well. So when I'm picturing things in my head, I feel like I'm kind of photoshopping images I've seen before, or memories I've seen before. So I can't generate a new picture, if that makes sense. I have to construct a picture. So imagining is really hard for me, which is maybe why the thing that I landed on was the warm, slow moving water. I am a bath person, so much. And so I was just oh, I can imagine just standing in warm water. That sounds really good right now. That is the thing that I think I was latching on to of I just want to be in warm water when I'm in a bath. So it's not necessarily something that's beyond the text, but something I could identify with within the text.
No, and I think that identification helps us see a little bit more, right? Because when I read that, I just think of soaking my feet in some kind of warm water. But here you're bringing a more luxurious image to it, right? You're bringing a more enjoyable image where I just think, oh, this is nice to walk through. You're seeing where can I lay down in this nice water and, just have it kind of give me a warm hug. Liz?
I mean, I am also an aphantasia person. So here we are. Two people who can't imagine things, imagining stuff. No, it's good because you actually can gain skill at it by practicing, and it's hard for me. So I was also drawn to the sensation of water in this, and the contrast between if we've got the shimmering surface of the water, we've got the sun, right? And just the feeling of the warmth of the sun and then having your feet be cool in the water is really interesting to me. And I was also wondering and thinking about the colors of the stone. Is it going to be gray? Would it be blue? One of my favorite things to do at the beach is to look at the different colors of the rocks and how they change color when they get wet versus when they're dry. So I'm wondering about that. I'm almost picturing the bottom of the pure lake as being the little pebbles that you put in the bottom of an aquarium and how they're colorful, all different colors.
Oh, you just made me think of a post from The Onion that I shared on Bluesky with the caption. So I will pull this up in the show notes or something. But the thing is, the headline says this rock looked cooler when it was wet. And my caption was Tien to Kaladin. Just because that was their whole thing. It's it's a cool rock, but only when you put water on it.
Relevant.
Yep. Anyway, sorry.
I was thinking of the base of the Pure Lake not even being multiple rocks. I just think of it as a sheet of rock, because how else can it drain? And would it drag all those rocks down, right? I mean, it's the question of, we don't know all these mechanics, but that's how I kind of imagine it. So I think that's interesting that you see it as different types of rocks of different colors. And I'm kind of thinking of it as a bowl almost. Has it ever been described as rock cell and Coppermind?
So it says that the lake bottom has small ridges and sharp ledges of rock. So it sounds like Adam, it is a solid surface that's not a rocky surface because it drains into holes and pits in the ground. So I wonder if there are just multiple holes in various spots in the Pure Lake.
That doesn't discount Liz's imagination, though.
Indeed.
Maybe especially on the side. Especially on the side where that maybe as it's draining it starts to pull rocks from the shore.
All right, you guys ready for this second one?
Let's do it.
All right, so this is a quote. Looking out over the Devar Gardens, which were made up of stonework walls covered with different kinds of vines. They were beautiful, though Shallan had been the only one who truly appreciated them. This area of Yakaved, to the west and south of Althkar, of higher elevation and broken by mountains such as the Horneater Peaks, had a profusion of vines. They grew on everything, covering the mansion, growing over the steps. Out in the wilds, they hung from trees, grew over rocky expanses, as ubiquitous as grass was in other areas of Roshar. End quote.
I don't think I ever noticed this description of the vines before. We have a lot of talk about grass on Roshar, but this description of Yakaved being more of a viney place, I'm picturing almost like a southern weeping willow or like, what's it called? Wisteria bushes? Like the big, dramatic, draping branches. And of course, like the rock walls with vines gives me lots of Secret Garden vibes, which I watched a lot as a child, the movie. So
I got super gothic vibes.
yes.
I'm thinking of like edge dancers, or not edge dancers, of cultivation spren. Or like the descriptions of cultivation spren as these viney sort of creatures. And kind of like this feels like a really good representation of like cultivation. Like she is often represented with like vines. The Night Watcher is like a massive vines. And just like that tie to Roshar and like the gods of Roshar, like this feels like a really scene. It feels like a situational or scenic or locational way of describing that connection.
It also brings in a different reading between Alethkar Nation and Yakaved Nation. We don't get a lot of like understanding between the two because Yakaved obviously like instantly falls into war after the second book. But like thinking of Yakaved as the more cultivation nation and Alethkar as the more honor or odium based nation is something interesting to think about there.
I mean, kind of like Terabrandian was like cultivating Yakaved in order to like overthrow or like take charge, like become king. Like he was being very strategic about how he did that in a very cultivation kind of like pruning and trimming way.
Or grafting. How like focusing on that description also like brings in the like that gothic sense that I talked about earlier is very much present here. And I don't think it's ever been present for me of thinking of Shallan's estate as this like decrepit, overgrown, dying old family estate, right? That has ghosts of its own and things like that. And it's like, you know that, but slowing down to read through the description again made me think of that.
It does have very much overtones of like a gothic story. Like I'm not like a literature person who knows very well gothic literature, but like from what I understand about gothic literature, like her story like feels like it has the same tones of like Jane Eyre, of like ghosts in the attic or like someone hiding behind corners. Like it just has the same kind of vibes. And I also hadn't ever really made that connection, but it does deeply feel that gothic vibe.
That was another thing that came up in my imagination is I did a study abroad where we hiked across England and went to all of these Victorian era gardens where things are very manicured and like designed to look natural, but like they're not at all. Like they're purposefully designed that way. And thinking of the Devar estate that as one of those gardens, like Stourhead or Blenheim Palace, any of the other gardens that I visited while I was there. So it gives English garden gothic vibes.
All right, so last one here. This is from Sess. So close your eyes and you're ready. So, quote, "This town, Ironsway, had a proper town square, several hundred homes, and 3 different taverns. That made it practically a metropolis for Badland, the small, mostly ignored stretch of land just north of the mountains near Silnesen. The area was technically part of Yakaved, but even its high prince tended to stay away from it." End quote.
For some reason, I am picturing this as being like one of the high mountain towns in Utah, right? Because we have this description of the mountains. So, like, kind of, it's out of the way. There's a good amount of homes, but it's pretty isolated still. It thinks it's big, but feels big because it's in a small place.
Something like Eber or Midway.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking.
It's a better description than mine, where like my first thought was like Baldur's Gate 3, which I played for hours until I got overwhelmed for multiple reasons. And I had schoolwork that I had to do. But I'm thinking specifically about like the town of Baldur's Gate, where you can run around. And like that's probably the biggest region of the game. And there are probably more than 3 taverns. I can count, let's say 1, 2. No, there are probably about 3 taverns. There may be more. But like off the top of my head, I can think of 2 for sure. And I know there's a 3rd I'm forgetting about. And like, it does feel like a small space still. It like you can run around it. I mean, you wouldn't actually, but like, it's like traversable in a way that cities now definitely don't feel like they are. I was just imagining like what the experience of like running through Baldur's Gate was like when I was playing the game, and it felt so big compared to the rest of the game. Like the rest of the game, you're running through these small areas, and it's like you walk through a town, you walk through a village, and it takes like 3 seconds to walk through the entire village. And just like what that would be like for someone who's like living in one of these small towns to suddenly show up in what feels like a metropolis, feels like it would be overwhelming. And like, if you have this guy, Took in this instance, is coming around and saying that he's been to all of these other places that you can only imagine. They're all kind of doing their own sacred imagining here as Took is telling them these stories of like all these places. And like, it would make the world feel bigger in a way that might make you want to dream a little bit more about what you could do. I guess justice for Took.
Maybe not. Maybe so. Who knows?
I mean, he did get murdered. That's not ideal.
I mean, he also was a favor of, using another body as a slave. So maybe not too much justice, or maybe justice for that.
Some level of justice.
Some form.
That's just not as catchy to put on a sticker. Some level of justice for Took.
I think that works on a sticker, actually. It's more complicated. Brings conversation.
We should bring those to Dragonsteel. That would be great.
Some justice.
Stickers.
With a little asterisk next to the sum.
Some justice for Took, who nobody remembers. It's okay.
I think that would be beautiful. All right, I think this moves us perfectly into our Wisdom of the Heralds then. So, of course, in this episode, right, we've talked through exploration. We've talked through, expanding and exploring more of the world through, imagining how else it could be, or thinking about what we are imagining when the world is described to us. So what from this podcast episode would you like to take into your daily life? What wisdom of the herald did you find in our conversation today?
One thing that I've really enjoyed about entering academia is the opportunity to travel to conferences, which is fun. But I have a tendency to structure my time around going to all the sessions and doing academic things and not leaving the convention center or the hotel. And so this is encouraging me to... I have one coming up in a month here, and to set aside some time for exploration, for doing the kinds of things that I did when I went to England, where you just wander around a neighborhood and you don't have a particular like sightseeing thing, a goal that you're headed towards, but just exploring and seeing what you find, being open to that happening to you.
I think for me, I am currently in what I am calling my dark night of the soul in my academic journey. I'm post going through I am technically ABD right now, but I don't know what my dissertation is exactly going to be because I put forward an idea, and that idea was promptly torn apart in the most loving way. And I'm very grateful that the critiques were laid against it, and it's made me think a lot, but it's kind of made me have to go back to the beginning to go return to, you know, my core text that I do really want to, and I see connections between it. I do want to build connections between. And this episode has made me want to reapproach those books with a sense of exploration, with a sense of like, I'm just trying to figure out what's happening here. I don't even know yet. Like, I thought I knew, and then everyone told me maybe not. And so I get to go back in, and I want to bring a little bit of that moment of vacationing away from my like bigger thought of kind of what I'm trying to piece together, and just go back into them with a more exploratory mindset of just like, I'm here to enjoy what's happening, but I'm also here to figure out where I can go out of this little dark moment that all academics have during the, you know, beginning part of their dissertation.
I think I really liked the phrasing, Adam, you had of the interludes being vacations. And I think what I want to do is add more regular vacations within my day-to-day life. So like, I do not take enough of a lunch break. I really should take a longer lunch break. It is okay if I get home half an hour later. But like to like find a way to set aside some time to intentionally have some exploration or like some joy, some vacation, so I can come back into the work that I'm doing with more enthusiasm. That there is so much value in taking a break and taking an intentional break, not just like a scrolling mindlessly on my phone for 10 minutes break, but like, what am I going to do for 10 minutes that brings me joy? What am I going to do for 15 minutes when I get home that brings me joy? Like being intentional about the ways that I explore happiness.
Thank you for joining us today on The Storming Journey. You can support our work on this podcast by subscribing to our Patreon, leaving a review, or sharing the podcast with a friend. We hope you'll join us next week, and in the meantime, remember, journey before destination.